Hello, hello, welcome to Amaze on Instagram Live. I'm just going to invite my wonderful guest, Rosalia Rivera. Ah, Okay. So welcome. I'm so excited. We are going to be having a conversation about how to talk about consent. Hello, I see Kristen, I see Charlotte. I'm trying to wave. Um, and we're going to talk about the basics. Hello, Rosalia, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
You
I got
just
to adjust
like
my
threw me
camera. I'm a
right
little
in.
on the downside here. So I was just saying hello and welcoming people to the conversation. I'm delighted to see your face because I've seen your face before, but I've usually talked to you on the phone. So this is new and fun.
Yeah, this is the first time. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello to people who are joining. I'm really, really excited about this conversation. Rosalia, I've known about you for ages. Sorry, let me step back. I'm Dr. Christine Coe. I help amaze parents with all sorts of parent engagement stuff, and I do their Facebook Lives and their Instagram Lives. And when I come back as a new person in another life, I want to be a sex educator because this content means so much to me. So Rosalia, I would love if you would just introduce yourself and tell us about you. Your work is incredible, and I will share in stories later a CNN article I wrote that where I interviewed you. But you're just awesome. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to our crowd.
Thank you. I just want to say I love Amaze. I've been also following your work and Amaze's work for a while. I learned about you through Sex Positive Families, Melissa, and love sharing the content with my community as well because this is such important and critical information. So thanks for that. And so yeah, I'm Rosalia Rivera. I'm the founder of Consent Parenting. I am a consent educator and child sexual abuse prevention specialist. And I work predominantly with survivor parents. I'm a survivor, consider myself a thriver, and I'm on this mission to eradicate child sexual abuse. And it's, how to empower parents so that they don't teach this from a place of fear, but from a place of empowerment and confidence. So that's what I do.
That's amazing. And I apologize, I had the accent on the wrong syllable on
That's
saying your
okay.
name. So that is my bad, Rosalia. Um, I'm all about owning the mistakes. So I know this part is going to be old hat for you, but I would like for you to state, for the record, something very basic. How early can parents talk to kids about consent?
So I think really it can start as soon as the child is really able to start comprehending what we're saying. So it depends on the child, obviously, but anywhere around the age where they're starting to transition from diapers to potty, where they're learning about their bodies, right? They start to have that awareness around their bodies. But I always say you can start talking to kids about it as soon as they're born because they're understanding communication about how we engage in consensual ways with them or non-consensual ways. Sometimes we have to change the diaper and, communicating that empathy that we recognize and validate their feelings and experience. But just starting that communication so that once you are in that piece of transitioning and they're starting to develop language and understand language, it's an easier transition both for the parent and the child. So you can start as soon as they're born, but essentially for them to really fully understand it, it's from I would say around 2 and up.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I think basically, when they're verbal, and the reason I wanted to ask that question straight up, as I'm sure you can guess, is because we get questions all the time about when you can talk to kids about sex and health and that kind of topics, and parents are always a little like, really that early? And it's like, yeah, really that early.
Yes.
So it's super, super important. Well, in the CNN article I mentioned, I started out with a story about why consent has always been very important to me, especially when I became a parent. I was a kid when I was at a family gathering and one of my aunts came and gave me a smack on the back and pulled open the front of my shirt to check my breast development. And yeah, not much in the way of any respect for any boundaries. So, one of the things that I always love to communicate to parents is that, and sort of one of my kids' first entries probably into conversations about consent is I've always been team, you don't have to give a hug to a relative, and you could do, or a friend, you could do a high five, you could do a wave if you don't want any contact. It's all good.
Yeah.
So I bring up that example because I'm curious, and ultimately the goal is for us to get parents and caregivers on board with just really open, shame-free conversations. But for the parents who might be nervous and feel like the conversations about consent have to do with sex, can you give me one of your favorite examples of doesn't have anything to do with sex ways to communicate about consent with a kid?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing with consent. It's been tied to sexuality, I think in large part because of the Me Too movement, and the conversations about consent always centered around adult sexuality. But consent is really about permission, and it's really about communication between how we engage, between our bodies physically. But once we get older, we can expand that conversation to all kinds of consent. But for kids, it really starts with the basics of, if you are not comfortable with someone tickling you, if you
Mhm.
don't like when someone rubs your shoulder, if you don't want someone patting you on the head, you have the ability and the right to say, please stop. I don't like that. That makes me uncomfortable. I didn't give you permission. So there's lots of ways that we can teach our kids to vocalize what their boundaries are. So it's about the foundation of teaching them that their whole body is their private property, and they get the right to choose how people engage with them physically. And so that you can give kids examples of things like tickling, or even things like, eating, right? When we make kids eat past the point of where they're satiated, and they are saying, I don't want to eat anymore, and we force them to eat more, we are really crossing that boundary. So lots of different ways that we can explain it that have zero to do with sex or sexuality, that don't necessarily have to do with private parts. It's really about helping kids understand agency, right? Their body autonomy. Your body belongs to you. You have rights to boundaries. And these are the ways that you can communicate that. These are the ways that people might engage with you. And you have that right to speak up and say, please stop, or that's fun, let's keep going, right? So if you're enjoying the tickling, then that's okay. You can express that too. You can ask for more. If you don't like it, you can say, please stop. And if they don't stop, then here's what you can do next, right? And so giving them some exit strategies of getting help, of asking you, or vocalizing different ways that, your voice can be heard. So there's lots of different components to it.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And I also think that one thing, if parents and caregivers kind of want to think about consent as a really wonderful multi-dimensional communication tool with kids, is that I think it's also a real opportunity for kids to practice empathy and friendship and other relationships, because not only do you want to establish your own boundaries, but you want to respect other people's boundaries. And, that's a big piece of the journey, I think, too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think is lost in the conversation too when we're teaching kids about abuse prevention. I think it's just about the child preventing it for themselves, but it's really also about saying we want to respect the rights of others as well. And so it's about explaining that it is a two-way situation. So it's great to talk about it as it relates to peers, as it relates to siblings, as it relates to parents. Parents have to, they should be asking as well as the child, engaging back with the parents. So there's so many opportunities. And, a lot of times parents are afraid to get it wrong. And I always encourage you to remember that it's okay to get it wrong, because in life, people will get it wrong. And so being able to navigate that space of how to, apologize, how to communicate, how to understand rejection, like all of these really important relationship pieces, right, as kids develop. So all of this really helps for kids to understand that it's a two-way street. It's not just about how you feel, but it's also about how to engage in the world respectfully with others.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the pieces of pushback that we often get, or I think, sex educators get a lot, and organizations, and I'm sure there's some of this that you've experienced, is there's a real common comment like, why do we have to address this? Like, I want my kids to be innocent. If I tell them about bad things will happen, all sorts of things like that. So, in that article where I interviewed you, you said, sorry, I'm looking over here because I'm reading it off my screen. Parents need to reframe their perspective from shielding their kids from bad things and protecting innocence to education and empowerment. So, can you just say a little bit more about that? Because I think that can be, like, I agree 100%, and I think that can be like a challenging flip for a parent to or a caregiver to switch.
Yeah, I think that part of it is this idea that educating children about their bodies or about age appropriate sex ed is somehow going to remove that innocence. And in fact, it actually increases the risk of an offender taking advantage of that situation. And that's a higher risk of losing their innocence because they would be in a potentially dangerous situation, an unsafe situation. So we're actually not protecting their innocence by not giving them information that could reduce their risk for abuse. So that's why I say, we really need to shift our perspective on that. And then in terms of empowering children, it's really, when we're teaching this information, it's really about educating them for the world that we currently live in. I think it's also naive to think that children aren't getting a lot of exposure in the world about sex and sex education. So if we're not taking that lead, we're really not empowering them to understand what they're absorbing in the world, to recognize that we're a safe authority to ask questions to. And so we're really leaving them to be, almost sheep in a world of wolves, and I don't say that to make it sound like it's, a dangerous world, but if we don't educate children, we leave them at a higher risk for abuse. So we have to educate so that they can become empowered.
Yeah, and so absolutely. One thing that you had brought up in when I interviewed you earlier or last year was, you know, things like, sorry, and I am going to take it over into the like child abuse and predator space here because I think obviously all of this is super related. And one of the things that you had said that made me kind of sit up and I was thinking, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense, like based on some things that happened to me in life, um, is that, predators will have an ear out. They're kind of like, listening, they're watching, and there are subtle, maybe seemingly subtle to us, but not so subtle to them cues, like if a kid uses sort of cutesy words for body parts instead of real anatomical terms, that can be like a flare, like, oh, okay, there's like shame-based kind of education going at home. Are there other which would make them more of a potential target? And again, I'm not trying to scare people, I'm just trying to lay out the realities. So I would love it. Are there other examples of things like that, like real tactical ways that parents can kind of like adjust the way they communicate about things at home in order to create sort of a more open and open conversational environment that will make their kid not such an obvious target, for lack of better words?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the thing with abuse prevention that a lot of people, and it's kind of a misnomer, is that if you are going to teach, this education, this, about private part safety and all of these kinds of pieces, that that's going to, again, take away their innocence, versus really educating kids on those things, like even the language that we use, like safe or unsafe versus good or bad touch, right? Mm-hmm. That makes a big difference because unfortunately, offenders have a list of what makes a child an easier target. And so when, it's an unfortunate reality that we need to understand. And this is why I say parents have to educate themselves about what grooming strategies are, so that they understand how an offender would think, so that you can pick up on those red flags and step in, right? Because it is our job for, while our kids are learning about these things. So some tactical things that we can do is, of course, teach the correct terminology. If you're uncomfortable with that, there are so many great tools and resources. Amaze shares some amazing resources in video form, right? So if you can't even read a book because, you know, possibly you didn't grow up with these words, you still have shame around these words, or you have fear of using these words. There's so many tools and resources today that we can use to teach this to kids in a way that is a little bit less uncomfortable for us, so that we can start to acclimate ourselves to the use of these words, to keep these open lines of communications with our kids. So use tools, you know, so that you can make sure you're teaching the right language and not these cutesy terms, because that does increase the risk of a predator saying, oh, this isn't being taught at home, this child doesn't know, so it's someone I can take advantage of. Another one that's really important is that use of safe versus unsafe instead of good versus bad. Because, you know, children will start to recognize there's certain parts of my body that feel extra sensitive. It may feel good to the child. And so if they are being taught this confusing language of good and bad touch, if someone touches them there and it does feel good, but they're taught that that's supposed to be a bad touch, it can be very confusing. The predator can realize that this is confusing for the child, that they haven't been taught about the biology and the functions of their body. And so, you know, being comprehensive about the sex education that we're teaching our kids is really important. And I love that there's this, you know, one particular video where, you know, Amaze did a great job of pointing out, you know, this child said, what's an erection, you know, and so I think some parents would have been like, oh my goodness, like, why do we have to teach this? Well, kids are going to naturally ask this question because it's a normal body function that penis owners will have. And so not, you know, giving them that information really, again, increases their risk for a potential predator to take advantage of that. So educating them on that and saying it's normal, and here's the safety around that, right, is so key for kids to know. So those are, you know, two, you know, basic examples, is making sure you use the correct terms, but also making sure that you're teaching kids about the body functions. And if they're curious, to not shy away from answering those questions properly.
That's so, so fantastic. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I also wanted to say, you know, just a few minutes ago, we were talking about, or you were sharing about, you know, empowering kids and how that is a big piece of this. And I think the other thing that, as a parent and in this work that I do with Amaze, that I would like to encourage parents and caregivers to shift their thinking to, is that this is a moment of empowerment for you. You know, like, many of us, so many of us, received nothing as, you know, as kids, you know, for sex ed. And this is an opportunity to do it so much better. And even if we're going to make mistakes, that's totally fine. Kids, you can't talk too much, you know, they'll tune you out if you're going on too long. So I think that's one of the reasons I love this subject matter and this parenting, you know, new framework and new way of being, because I just feel like there's so much opportunity for us to do it just way better than what we had when we were growing up, you know?
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right. So I know I'm running short on time with you because you're a very busy person, but you know, you have said it's not a child's responsibility to prevent an abuse. It's an adult's job. Yes. And I think that we've talked about a bunch of tips for how, you know, adults can like work on consent and working on body safety with their kids. I would be curious about your thoughts about how to normalize these conversations adult to adult, because I think we do get stronger as parents together when we feel like, okay, this isn't me just being like kind of in my own silo trying to communicate about this stuff. Like, we need to do this as a village. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I say I have a 50-50 rule. 50% of what we need to talk about is with our kids and teach them consent and body safety. And the other 50% is teaching the adults in our children's lives. And I think if we come from this place of education, instead of, you know, feeling like we're going to be having a morality conversation, because I think that's what I think a lot of parents fear, is that the person that they're speaking to is going to feel like you're pointing a finger at them, or why are you bringing this up, or whatever, you know, misconceptions or misunderstandings people have around this topic. They're afraid of, like, how am I going to challenge that, or how am I going to be challenged when I bring this up? And so there's just an overall fear. And what I always encourage people do is to come from a place of compassion to educate. And if we recognize that most people don't know a lot of this information, they come from an old school background, or, you know, if it's grandparents, or they just come from a lack of education and ignorance around the topic. When we approach it from a place of wanting to educate and call people in to be part of a safety team or a safety community, creating consent culture, then you're more likely to get that buy-in and that interest to want to know more. So
Mhm.
I always say, you know, come from a place of just assuming that that person might not know, and teach, you know, so bring forth some education. Hey, I just learned about this, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, I wanted to share what I'm learning with you because this is what we're teaching at home now. And if you have any questions around it, I'm more than happy to share resources or to send you information that I've been learning, because we'd really love to have you on board with helping us to practice this. And, you know, as I'm learning, you know, you can be learning. And so we can create a safer community for my child, right? And so you're more likely to get buy-in than to say, you know, we're doing this, and so you have to do that with our kid from now on. And I think people just don't know how to have those conversations yet. So I say if you start from a place of education, you're more likely to get curiosity, to get buy-in, to get more support. And, you know, the person who's receiving it is probably going to just be surprised, you know, initially, and then want to, you know, support. If you get someone who pushes back, which is possible, or
Mhm.
who just resists or, you know, defies it, then that's something to pay attention to and to decide what are the boundaries that I want to have with this person. Because really, if you get a gut feeling or a gut reaction based on that, listen to your gut and maybe limit the one-on-one, you know, visits or situations that you allow your child to have. And just be consistent with, you know, this is what we're practicing, this is what we're doing. You can also leave clues around your house, like having posters up, or, you know, just bringing books over when they're having a visit. If you're bringing, you know, books over that talk about body safety, or, you know, that talk about, you know, ways to engage respectfully, that grandparent can read with the child, right? It's just another way for them to start to key in to what you're teaching at home. And other ways are just being direct and saying, please don't, you know, make sure that you're not asking our child to keep secrets, even if you think it's an innocent secret. And here's why, right? So
Yeah.
backing it up with like, here's the reason and the evidence of why this is important for us to practice. Because a lot of times grandparents just have these really innocent, like, oh, you know, I'm going to take my grandkid to go get ice cream, but I know so-and-so's, you know, my son's not going to want me to do that. So don't tell don't tell your dad. And they, you know, it may be an innocent secret, but this is a safety piece. So having that conversation, that education is going to be so helpful. So that's the 50% that I think a lot of parents are missing because they just don't recognize that that is what's going to really strengthen the community around them. And if there is a potential predator in your circle, now they see the red flags that your child is not going to be an easy target. They are not going to be, you know, someone that they're going to look at to potentially target because you're being a vigilant, proactive parent. So it really helps to reduce and create a bigger shield around your child while not, you know, reducing your child's complete, you know, agency to exist in the world and to develop social circles that are safe. So it really goes a long way and not just puts it all on your kids.
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. And you know, all these genius things that you're saying, you know, it really makes me want to underscore for folks who are listening in that, you know, if you're listening to Rosalie and being like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this and I didn't do this, and there, you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? So this is the moment where you can change things, and it's a really, really wonderful opportunity. So Rosalia, thank you for joining me today. We'll be sharing this everywhere. Everybody follow Rosalia at Consent Parenting. I'll just say it on the record, you are my consent shiro. So I just love you, and
Thank
your
you.
work is so crucial and important, and you're just like a wonderful person. So thank you today for joining me here
Oh,
at
thank you,
Amazing
Kristen.
Women. You're so awesome.
Thank you. Mutual admiration.
All right, take care.
Bye bye.